going to be unpacking the politics of the day, from whether Andy Burnham should call an early election to what the government would be like if it was run by CEOs, and if reality TV has had its moment. Joining me, their moment has definitely come. It's the Sunday Times columnist Charlotte Ivers. Welcome to the show, Charlotte.
Hello, Ed.
And the host of the Jimmy's Jobs podcast, the former number 10 advisor, Jimmy McLaughlin. Welcome to the show, Jimmy.
Hi, Ed.
Good to have you both on. Let's begin with the latest YouGov poll for the Times. It shows Labour is currently beating Reform UK, and it's the first time in 18 months this has been the case. It's won back votes previously lost to the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. The figures are Labour 24, Reform 22, Tories 21. They're all within the margin of error, so it's basically neck and neck. Charlotte, is this something that Labour can grab hold of?
Grab hold of in the sense of having a general election, something like that?
Absolutely, yes. Possibly.
Making bold choices. I mean, I think on both grounds, basically, they've already got a big majority, so they're in a strong position under those terms. The only reason really to have a general election or to would be to allow yourself to make some of these bold choices. So, you know, if they decide that they are really stuck because they do need to raise one of the big taxes, for example, then obviously that would be a way around that, to have a big general election and us all agree to it. I don't think they will, on the grounds that people don't like being told their taxes are going to go up, or, you know, hard choices are going to be made in any way. And I don't think the country is quite ready for an election that is fought on that basis. I think we'd all end up voting for someone else, really. So if I were Andy Burnham, I'd keep my head down, say thank you, Mr. Starmer, for my big majority, and just try and get on with it.
Is it a Burnham bounce, Jimmy McLaughlin, or is there something more substantial here?
Well, I think there is an element of a Burnham bounce. There's no doubt about that. And actually, that doesn't always happen with premierships. I mean, if you get a bounce, it does happen at the beginning of it. But I think this is a question that every Prime Minister that comes in replacing one who's won a general election faces. And you have seen with John Major, Theresa May, Gordon Brown and Boris Johnson, essentially them all have this decision to make, and it ends up dominating their premiership. John Major went long. That was a successful general election outcome. Gordon Brown decided to not have an early general election, and that was a bad call. Theresa May had an early general election, and that was a bad call. Boris Johnson had an early one, and that was a good one. So it shows that all the combinations are possible, and I think it's really difficult if you're in the Burnham camp to decide whether you're going to have an election. Because one of the differences with him this time is that, of course, he did not stand as an MP at the last general election, so he did not stand on that manifesto, and so he has a bit more wiggle room on that.
The pollster James Johnson of JL Partners has an article in today's Times. He says that Andy Burnham should seize this Goldilocks moment, as he calls it, and have an election either this year or, I suspect, early next year. James Johnson joins me now. Welcome to the show, James.
Hi there.
I have to say I found your article quite persuasive. I mean, I still am in the sort of Charlotte camp that I don't think they will call a general election, and if I was forced to make the decision, I probably wouldn't either. But at the heart of your thesis lies this kind of historic split on the right, which allows potentially Andy Burnham to get through with 30% of the vote, a slightly reduced majority, but still a healthy, workable majority.
Yeah, and I think this is like, you know, Jimmy's absolutely right there. You know, there has been a Burnham bounce, but that in itself is not really enough to think there might be an election. Governments get bounces all the time. They're usually quite fleeting. They don't usually tell us too much. But we're in a unique moment here where the right is split. Now, the right was split in 2024, and it allowed Keir Starmer to get a massive majority. The right is actually more split now than it was 2 years ago. You've got the Conservatives on around 20%, Reform on around 25%. If one of those parties does not go below around 15%, then Labour is a massive, massive winner of that, because if they consolidate the left enough in enough seats, they're able to keep the Tories away, and in other seats, they're able to keep Reform away. And that, to me, suggests there is a unique moment here for Andy Burnham that might not stay around. You know, if Nigel Farage doesn't stay leader for the whole Parliament, that would change. If, you know, he's onset by more crises and Reform voters leave, that might change. So I think he might be tempted by that. And the reason I say it's a Goldilocks moment is because Farage is strong enough to be able to to allow Burnham to make it a two-horse race between him and Farage, therefore rallying the left. But he's also too weak to actually win. And I think that puts Burnham in a good position. I think he'll be tempted.
And your second element of your argument is on the man himself. He's a gambling man and he's a good campaigner, so more likely to get away with it, more likely to take the decision and more likely to get away with it.
Yeah, and I think this is the difference with perhaps Theresa May, who I have a great fondness for, but there is no doubt that she was not the strongest campaigner. He clearly has been. I think a lot of people thought the Makerfield by-election might even unwind him. Perhaps he would get exposed on the campaign trail. It was quite the opposite, and he won it big time. As Jimmy says, he's not being in Parliament, so he's not going to feel as bound by those manifesto pledges. Just to pick up on what Charlotte said, though, which I think is right, is that question of, are the public ready for it? And I think you do need to have a good reason to go for an election. So he will need to think very carefully about what that looks like. But also, he shouldn't get too hung up on it. I think this was one of the problems going back to Theresa May in 2017. The advisors for that campaign were really, really worried and obsessed with this question of how do we justify it to the public? And that's actually where that famous line, strong and stable, came from. You know, Theresa May repeating strong and stable. It wasn't their election-winning argument. It was their argument about why we need an election now, because we need strong and stable government, etc., etc. Hopefully not traumatising too many listeners by bringing that one back up. But
you've
they got
traumatised me.
Exactly, and me and Jimmy as well. But they got stuck on that as an argument for why to have an election. So sometimes you just need to accept it and steamroll on and get on to the arguments.
Yeah, James Johnson from JL Partners, thank you very much for joining me. I mean, Charlotte, slam dunk argument there from James Johnson. Change your mind.
Change my mind. Are we disagreeing that much? That's always a problem on these shows, isn't it? On Times Radio, everyone's so reasonable, and you sort of think,
unreasonable.
I don't really know where the disagreement was. Whereas if this were, other radio stations that I shall not name competitors, we'd just sort of yell at each other, even though we agreed. It's such a risk, isn't it, to go for a general election, and it can go so wrong, particularly, as James said,
because of Liz Truss, you do know now that you will not be the shortest serving PM.
Yes.
Don't underestimate that as a factor.
That is true. That is psychologically important, I think. Yes, the question really is there a good reason to go for it, both in your own mind to mitigate for that risk and also in the eyes of the public, because, as you heard from James there, the public don't really like people who sort of waste their time for self-interested reasons, and particularly when you've got a big majority. I can imagine a lot of people being like, what? We told you already.
That is the best argument, the public reaction, which you can't predict, but you can take a fair go, Jimmy, that they would say, hold on, we've just had a general election, blah, blah, blah.
Completely. I think that is a very strong argument. One of the interesting things going back to the 2017 campaign was that I think the Conservative Party underestimated what happens with broadcasting rules, in the sense of they have to give the major parties equal time, and that was something that meant that Jeremy Corbyn got a lot more airtime than we had planned, and people sort of quite liked the freshness of him, as it were. Now that's all different a bit 10 years on. Social media, like Andy Burnham's clearly got a very strong social media game, but there are all these factors that you just won't have realised and can end up catching parties out, and they're all within sort of 4 or 5 points of each other. There's not a big difference.
Derek says great idea to have an election. While they're fighting amongst themselves for a few months, they won't be making even more stupid laws, and the rest of us can get on with our lives. We'll continue our discussion on how Andy Burnham is spending his first summer as the Prime Minister, and I'm unpacking the politics of the day with the Sunday Times columnist Charlotte Ivers and the podcast host Jimmy McLaughlin, the host of Jimmy's Jobs. Let's talk about the big story in Andy Burnham's in-tray. He said he's increasingly confident the early release of PC Andrew Harper's killers can be stopped by plans to free up prison places. Here's what the former Detective Superintendent Stuart Blake said. He was the lead investigator on Andrew Harper's case.
I was always confident that a solution would be found. It never sat comfortably with me that manslaughter, bear in mind we're talking about the unlawful killing of somebody, should ever be part of the proposed early release scheme. I understand and I appreciate the pressures that the prison service are under in terms of the numbers and obviously what's going through the courts today and in the weeks and months ahead. I understand that, and I understand the pressures and the decisions that the government have to make. This just isn't one that sits comfortably with me.
That was the former Detective Superintendent Stuart Blake, who of course led the investigation into the killing of PC Andrew Harper. Charlotte, it goes without saying that this is Andy Burnham's biggest test since he became Prime Minister. It looks like he's going to find a solution, but it's been a rough ride.
It has been a rough ride, and I always worry about policy making in this way. It sounds very kind of horrible to describe it as such, but sort of policy by victim. Any law that has somebody's name in it usually tends to be slightly bad law, because what happens is you get some sort of campaign from people who have been bereaved or something awful has happened to them, and it's unbelievably hard for politicians to say no to this. So, for example, there are new terrorism laws coming in called Martin's Law, named after one of the victims of the Manchester bombings. They're going to place these huge, what would you call it? Challenges, I suppose, inhibitions on small businesses, pubs, restaurants, places that are struggling to train everybody in counter-terrorism practices. But it's very hard for the government to say no when these campaigns come from victims and victims' families. And I think sometimes it's horrible to have to say it, but sometimes you do just have to take a step back and say, okay, on a broad level, is this what is best for the country, or are we doing something because it's emotive and because it is causing problems for Andy Burnham? And in this case, I'm slightly inclined to say, okay, if we are going to keep the killers of PC Andrew Harper behind bars, then everybody who is currently about to be released who is under manslaughter charges, they should be able to be forced to stay as well. This should not be just carved out because this is an emotive case. It's a case that we've all heard about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem that Andy Burnham faces from, as it were, his lawyers, saying if you carve out the killers of PC Harper, you'll get into all sorts of legal difficulties. And I completely agree with you, Charlotte. You say it's a horrible thing to say, but it's also a very sensible thing to say that there are too many, perhaps, policies that are driven by the headlines, and it would be better perhaps to have politicians who are prepared to take a principled and long-term view. Nevertheless, Jimmy, Andy Burnham should have seen this coming, and he could have asked the difficult questions. I mean, this whole review was sparked by the imminent release of PC Harper's killers. He could have given an early heads up and said, I don't want anyone who's been convicted of a violent offence to be released. Give me all the other options.
Yes, and I think that is a challenge with this particular policy. This is the difference between being a mayor and being Prime Minister. As a mayor, you can kind of take the stand for victims much more easily and campaign. As Prime Minister, you are faced with really difficult decisions that have consequences beyond it. This is not just a single issue. As Charlotte says, you will then have lots of other challenges and lots of other problems that you create, and you end up storing more problems further down the line. So it's one of these things that's sort of perhaps a bit easier to deal with in the first few weeks when you've got the Burnham bounce and the goodwill that we've been talking about, but you end up creating problems further down the line for yourself.
Absolutely. And let's talk a bit about how Andy Burnham communicates, because you, Jimmy, were one of the first people in to interview him. I mean, he's in Derbyshire today, kicking off his UK summer tour. He's talking about reform to high streets, which we might talk about later, ironically, with Angela Rayner, because part of his reform is to get rid of vape shops. Angela Rayner, probably Britain's most famous vaper. But he has already kind of made his mark. The Westminster Commentariat, we all talk about his communication skills, his use of social media. You were called in, I think you were the second person after Laura Koonsberg from the BBC to do a big interview with him. They chose you, presumably because they wanted to reach a different audience, to be slightly unconventional. What do you make of Andy Burnham's comms strategy?
Well, I think his comms strategy has been very impressive, and I think one of the reasons, though, that he's good at this compared to perhaps previous prime ministers is, and he's similar to Donald Trump and Nigel Farage in this, is he's been doing it quite a long time. He's been in politics now for 25 years. So actually, he's good at the socials game, there's no doubt about that, but also he can do the long-form interview and talk a lot about his early career and so on, and the depth that he showed. I mean, he started quoting poetry halfway through it. Like, that is a very, you couldn't do that on the Laura Koonsberg show, but you can do it on a podcast, and then it gets seen by sort of, 1 million people online as well. So I think it's a very interesting strategy. It's certainly easier to do it at the beginning of it. He's also been doing lots of different things with various football shirts and so on as well. He is very adept at this kind of communication, and I think there is an opportunity for politicians to do more of it.
It's really interesting because, for all of us, I think there's a sort of slight element of hypocrisy, because on the one side we huff and puff and say, where are the policies, where are the principles? And then on the other side, we're absolutely obsessed, as we have been with every Prime Minister, what is their partner like and so on, and what do they eat for breakfast. And I was struck that one of the interviews Jimmy gave after his podcast was that the question he's asked by everyone is, did you like Andy Burnham? We want to know our Prime Minister in quite a personal way. So Andy Burnham, to a certain extent, Charlotte, is responding to that.
He is, definitely, and he's doing it incredibly effectively. And I don't really like his silly little videos that he does. I find them demeaning to the office. Yeah.
Last time you were on, Charlotte, I accused you of becoming a grumpy old person.
I know.
And you're carrying on the theme. I love it.
My position has not changed on being grumpy or indeed on the videos. But then, I'm speaking to people who, various people in the last couple of weeks have raised some person they know in their life, be it a friend or their personal trainer or their builder or whatever, who doesn't follow politics, who didn't know who Peter Mandelson was when he'd been on the front page of the paper every day for a month, but they've seen a video of Andy Burnham's and they've gone, oh, I like him, and that is so valuable. So I'm forced to conclude that I am out of touch, that the videos are good actually, Andy Burnham is good actually, and on our heads be it.
I think if they can keep it, the pub snacks one has done incredibly well, where he's rating pub snacks.
And that's where I was.
That's
That's where I was with Grumpy Charlotte.
Yeah.
There's a line where he says, "Scampi fries." You just want
He's
to
the Prime Minister of our country. We used to run half the world.
But he was making an announcement on pubs. I think it works to a degree. I also think that the question that you pose, Ed, that people have asked me is, did you like Andy Burnham? Also just shows that at the moment, not a lot of people have an opinion on him. And we had this a little bit with Theresa May when she came in as well. Again, a bit of an unknown politician and so on. And people want to warm to their politicians, particularly after the last 10 years. I think they want, he does have goodwill of people wanting him to do well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Theresa May couldn't communicate to save her life, so I'm not sure a social media strategy would have worked for her. But it's interesting, David Cameron, what's the one thing we remember from his time as Foreign Secretary? His walking videos.
Yeah.
Do you remember those?
Do we remember his walking videos?
Everyone commented. That's all we commented about. We didn't comment about the geopolitics. We commented on how David Cameron could speak and walk at the same time.
Yeah, what do I remember about David Cameron in general? The minute you said, I thought I remember that David Cameron rolls his sleeves up and wears polo shirts on holidays. So that's weird, isn't it? Given that
exactly.
he was Prime Minister for 6 years.
Of course, Cameron was a pioneer of this. Do you remember Webb Cameron in 2006, 20 years ago, before all of these social media?
It was a Steve Hilton idea. It was a Steve Hilton idea, and you can watch Steve Hilton's videos wherever you get your X or TikTok. Let's talk as well. You're driving this discussion, Jimmy McLaughlin. You're focusing just on what interests you. What would happen if CEOs ran the government or the cabinet was made up of entrepreneurs? You have views, Jimmy.
I do. So Jimmy's Jobs of the Future interviews entrepreneurs and CEOs, and I can't tell you, Ed, how many times when the mics are off they say to me, I've been thinking about getting into politics. So I think it's something they all have an interest in. And my point that I've been making quite a lot lately is that this century, you have had people who've been able to build serious wealth in their 20s and 30s. In the last century, that was not really possible because of the internet and global markets, etc. And I think a lot of these guys are looking at our politics and look at what has happened over the last 10 years and are thinking, can I get involved and can I run the country better? It's a bit like your Times Radio quiz game.
Yeah, I mean, Grumpy Charlotte.
Hello, Ed. How can I help?
Back me up here. This is a ridiculous idea.
It's a ridiculous idea for young, successful people to get involved in politics.
Yes.
I mean, I agree, but from their perspective, why just carry on going and having a lovely time and making money?
Grumpy Ed will harump and say, "It really annoys me what Jimmy's just said." I'm trying to be like another. I fall back on the George Osborne line, which is politics is a profession like any other, and it takes a while to get good at politics. And people are that terrible line, have you had a proper job before you became a politician? But being a politician is a skill, and we've seen people like Archie Norman, for example, come in having been hugely successful businessmen and flopped as politicians. We have had success stories. Andrew Griffith, the current shadow trade minister, used to run Sky, is, I think, a pretty good MP and shadow spokesman. But it's not necessarily a thing. It seems to me lazy to just say, just because you've run a business, you can then be a good politician. They're different arts.
So I think that's true, but I do think being a politician, being a business person first, brings certain skills, certain aptitudes, certain life experiences really valuable in politics. So my view would be, as long as they arrive with a sense of humility and they go, okay, just because I ran a, I don't know, FTSE 400 company does not mean that on day one I'm going to be able to run a civil service department. I'm going to talk to people, I'm going to listen to people, I'm going to go to the training sessions that I'm told to go to. Then I think that could be really great. I think the combination of both sets of skills is valuable. And yes, you know, it's great. It's great to have someone who knows where every lever in the civil service is and how to pull it to get things done. But we've got a lot of those within the civil service itself. So having a bit of something extra, I think, is quite valuable.
I guess what I think, Jimmy, is it's a bit of a mindset. You know, we were discussing earlier, Charlotte's good point that, you know, you shouldn't kind of make policy on the fly and respond to kind of public opinion in the short term. I was always struck, you know, the politicians who could kind of see a few moves ahead and say, actually, you know, do we need this kind of legislation? It's going to potentially bung things up, bring in more regulation. We need politicians who take a long-term view, but not necessarily politicians who have had the specific business experience you're talking about. And also entrepreneurs are pretty insufferable.
Well, I think there's an element of that. I think one of the things is that actually business leaders can learn quite a lot from politicians when it comes to communication. That argument doesn't get made very often.
That's a good point.
I think
Thank you for making it.
Should be made more. And I think there's very difference between entrepreneurs and corporate CEOs as well. So I think it's a real challenge. I mean, your point about George Osborne is interesting. I mean, you know, he didn't have a job before politics.
That's right.
Had a few after to kind of make up for it. But so I think it's just quite interesting. And like you say, a lot of people aren't successful when they're business leaders and go into politics. But I just think now with careers getting longer, there's more opportunity for them to do that and so on. But Charlotte's right. You can't just sort of think, well, just because I've run a FTSE 100 that I can then run a government department. They are very different beasts and they require a lot of different skills. The thing in politics is that you have, and I don't like the term, but stakeholders. You have a lot more competing...
Stakeholders is a terrible word.
You've got a lot more competing interests as a politician. With a business leader, primarily your job is to serve your shareholders and your employees to a degree.
Exactly.
Like, there's a lot more people you need to consider when you're a politician.
Charlotte is always right, as her husband told me just recently. But Charlotte, you've been married before by accident, I gather.
I have, yes. This is quite unnerving to me, Ed. As have you probably, as have you, Jimmy. I'm really sorry to break this to you. The government are up to something, and I do not care for it. Let me shock you, Ed. Every week I arrive.
You sound quite grumpy about this.
I am quite grumpy about this. Well, I'm not, because I'm seeking to stop it before it happens. So there is this one line in the Labour manifesto which sounds very innocuous, which it's something along the lines of, you know, we will seek to protect the rights of women and protections for women in cohabitation. You go, what? What about women in cohabitation? What do you mean? And basically, what the government wants to do is, if you have been living with a partner for 3 years, they would like you to have rights as if you got married and are now getting divorced. So they can take you to court, you can take them to court, and there will be some sort of division of assets according to need. Lovely, fluffy idea. You know, back in the age where only the man had the job and you had the poor woman sitting at home raising the kids. Fantastic idea for her if for some reason they hadn't got married. Quite weird in the modern world, I think.
Yeah.
Quite weird phrasing to say it's protection of women. Women have jobs too now.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing. Actually, young women have better paid jobs and are better educated and have
That's right. They're
better earning potential.
In every way superior. Yeah.
And I just think the whole point of getting married is you are signing a contract. That's why you do it.
Yeah.
And then part of that is if that contract is broken, there is some sort of recompense. The idea that you can just be living with someone for 3 years, and we've all seen friends try and break up with someone, and it's really hard because you don't want to hurt them. And if no one's done anything that wrong, you can just slip into being around with someone for a bit longer, particularly if you're living together. And then, you know, you've got to extract yourself from all of that. And then suddenly you wake up one day and the government goes, oh yeah, give them 40 grand.
Yeah.
You didn't sign up to this, but hand over half of your flat. What an insane thing to do. I'm really, really annoyed about it.
But I quite liked, Charlotte, what emerged from your column was the accidental new kind of social norm, a bit like employment rights, that it kind of forces you to dump your partner after you've been dating them for 2 years and 11 and a half months.
Well,
So you don't trigger the 3-year cohabitation clause. I mean, it does sound pretty unworkable to me, Jimmy.
It does, and I think it's just this idea of where legislation created ends up causing more and more problems, and why we've got such a insane tax system and so many laws and regulations. I think you're right. It does sound like it's dated from a sort of different century almost.
Yeah, well, think of the family law courts. If you're living together and then you break up, but you're still living together because things are tricky, and then, I don't know, maybe you snog because you've been together for 2 years and these things are tricky. Does that count towards the time? I can imagine the lawyers arguing it in court. It's going to be a nightmare. The whole point of marriage is it starts on a certain date, it ends on a certain date.
What is the point of getting married if this law comes in, Jimmy? He doesn't want to talk about it. He's got no views at all. Well, I bet you've got views on reality TV. How vacuous is too vacuous for reality TV? Have we reached our limit? Charlotte, it's a brilliant review, I've got to say. You've got to read it if you've got the Times app. I don't know if it's in print, but it's definitely on the app. The pain. You can feel the pain as you read your review of $1 Million Nannies.
Yes, $1 Million Nannies is a structured reality show about kind of super mega nannies, most of whom are kind of 22-year-old Americans who are famous on Nanny Talk, the TikTok for nannies. I exhaust myself even saying that. And it's exactly what you'd expect. It's sort of vapid, it's vacuous, everyone on it is absolutely terrible, but aren't all reality shows. The reason I watched it is because sometimes these structured reality shows sort of break through and they are actually considered good. Selling Sunset or Real Housewives of New York. People love those. And you don't want to be the snob that doesn't watch these things and misses out on that. Wow, it's so awful, and particularly it's so awful because there are children involved, and it's full of the most kind of awful, vapid, vacuous rich people, and then they're poor baby little children who are just being taught to be the worst human beings in the world. And you think at least our mega rich people in London here, they will want their nannies to be, I don't know, Oxbridge educated and grade 8 violin and all this because they want their kids to be kind of cultured and all this. Whereas these people on this show, they're just teaching their kids basically to be kind of vacuous consumers of designer bags, and it just kind of breaks my heart a bit, and I felt that I was being sort of made less human by watching it. That's my assessment of that show.
Yes, but you watched it for us, so we're pleased that you did that. I mean, these reality shows, are you a great fan of those?
No, I'm not, but it's interesting how they spur many careers now at the beginning of them, but I do think people have to be careful. I mean, we had a male nanny earlier this year, Ed, and I was...
A manny?
You had a manny.
A manny, and I was surprised by this to begin with, but actually, I think it's a great job for people early on in their career. He's studying law and so on. He looks after our kids between 4 and 6 each day, picks them up from school. It's far better, he says, than working in a bar. He's paid more to do it, and he has a relationship with kids and so on, rather than dealing with drunk people between the hours of 8 and 11. So I think it's as a career choice, it's quite interesting how it's changing.
But it's kind of weird how many of these kind of reality shows they eke out with these extraordinary characters. I mean, I couldn't watch Selling Sunset. I find these people completely sort of unpalatable. I mean, what's the difference between Selling Sunset and $1 Million Nannies? Why did you get on better with that?
I suppose part of what you're doing here, the fact that the people in them are unpalatable, is part of the nature of the shows, right? It's part of why people are tuning in. If you speak to casting directors for these things, they are not looking for nice people you'd want to go to the pub with. It's sort of the opposite of the Andy Burnham effect, right? You're not meant to identify with these people. Maybe one of them will be nice. I think it was the involvement of children. It was the fact that these guys clearly cannot consent to their involvement. The fact that I'm just watching them have their personalities and lives ruined in front of me, that kind of made me a bit sad. Adults, if they want to disgrace themselves on TV, who am I to stop them?
I mean, Jimmy, these are jobs, though. I mean, that's the interesting thing about this kind of reality TV marketplace and the marketplace for creators, as they're now known, or influencers, is this new economy is all about new jobs. In some ways, that's justified, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think it's I think the influencer creator economy is a fascinating beast that is getting more and more serious. And in some ways, journalists are having to do it more as well. You know, if you now go on the Times Instagram page and so on, that you'll have journalists summarising their stories and so on. So I think this whole kind of space is going to get bigger and bigger. You know, we have our first creator prime minister in Andy Burnham, etc. So it will be interesting because, yes, it does lead to jobs created.
I love the way you call him a creator prime minister. So Andy Burnham is less prime minister, more influencer.
Well, I think, yeah, and that's, you know, what the job of journalists and politicians in some ways is the original influencer, right? You call them that at a dinner party, you will get short shrift, I can assure you.
From Charlotte.
But, their job is to...
remind you that we used to run half the world.
We did, and do we anymore? No. Did we used to have TikTok videos? No. I think I rest my case.
And on that note, Charlotte Ivers, Sunday Times columnist, and Jimmy McLaughlin, the host of the brilliant Jimmy's Jobs podcast. Thank you, as always, for coming on the show and talking through some of the stories that interested me that are running in the news today.